In today's Mr. Ballen reaction, he's back on his real images, well, 3 stories with real images that have got frightening backstories. But in this one, in the brackets, he's put, warning, these give me 3 weeks of nightmares. Wonder how many weeks of nightmares the like button has. Let's see what he does to it. Door frames are handy for that, you're right. Right, okay, Mr. Ballen. 3 stories with disturbing images. Let's go.
Today, I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and at the end of each of them, I'm going to show you the haunting photo or photos that are famously associated with them.
Okay.
But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time you're at the Like Button's house, please secretly sneak into their fridge and replace all of their vanilla ice cream with mashed potatoes. Also, please subscribe.
That's all right. That's all right. I don't really eat ice cream that much, but I do eat mashed potatoes. But in this country, we just simply call it mash. You don't need to be called mashed potatoes. It's too many syllables. It takes too long to say. What do you want on your Sunday dinner? I'll have some mash, please. Do you know what I mean? We already know it's potatoes. All right, let's go.
Subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
First one's called Locked In. Let's go. I hope it's a pub.
At 10 p.m. on January 31st, 2012,
okay,
a 23-year-old man named Chen Rongyu walked into an internet cafe in New Taipei City, Taiwan.
Right.
The cafe had a front counter where a cashier would check you in and sell you snacks and drinks. And then from where he was looking, behind the cashier were all these tables, these long rows of tables with different computer stations at them. And there was at least about 30 people already sitting behind each of these terminals, fully engrossed in whatever game or whatever they were doing.
Kind of like Call of Duty.
And not one of these people even looked up when Chen walked inside. I mean, nobody was interested in Chen. But for Chen, that was sort of part of the allure of this cafe. He got to, sit down and play his game and be totally left alone.
Yeah.
And so Chen walked up to the counter and paid for some time. He also bought a soda, and then he walked around back. He found an empty computer, sat down, and immediately fired up his favorite game, League of Legends. League of Legends is a multiplayer online battle arena game.
You're a nerd. Dungeons and Dragons type shit and casting spells and that. It's hardly Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy's better. This, nah. Warlocks and dragons and... No. I like Final Fantasy better. I like anime-based, turn-based strategy RPGs, not this crap.
Game that's extremely popular all over the world. And Chen took this game very seriously. He routinely would spend 8-hour-long marathon sessions at this internet cafe just playing League of Legends to try to level up and move up in the ranking system. And so today, that's what Chen was going to do. And so after the game was booted up, he immediately locked in and he was in his first battle. And then before long, hours had gone by and he hadn't even gotten up. And then eventually, a couple times he got up to get a soda refill and to get a snack. But I mean, he basically just all night gamed, just nonstop. Periodically stopping to literally put his head down on the table and take a 15-minute power nap, only to get right back up and get back.
That's obsessive.
So all night just on this game. By a little after noon on February 1st, Chen had been gaming nearly non-stop for 14 hours.
Wow.
Which was long even by his standards, but he couldn't stop now. He was exhausted, but he was doing great. This is like one of the best sessions he had ever had. And right at that moment, he was in the middle of this really intense match where his team was about to get knocked out by this really good opponent. And if Chen could just lock in, they could pull out a win. And so Chen was super focused, leaned forward, hands flying across his keyboard and mouse, and he managed to dodge an attack, and then he geared up for the big strike. And right as he did, something went wrong.
I tell you what, right, when you're playing a game and you're getting your ass kicked, or if you're playing Mario Kart, you think you're being easy, like it's too easy, and you're driving, and then you're like, it gets too intense. You sit forward, as though that's going to make you play better. Do you know what I mean? You sit forward as though, I'm taking this game serious now. Do you know, it's like, why do we do that? Why do people do that in games? You can't just sit and relax. It's like when I play Mario on it on the gaming channel, and then I can't do a level. I'm like, face of concentration, sat forward. It's the things you do.
And he geared up for the big strike, and right as he did, something went wrong. About 9 hours later, around 9 p.m., the cashier at this internet cafe had just finished giving another soda to one of the customers, and then they looked out and she noticed there was nobody else in line. Now, the job of this cashier was not just to check people in and give them snacks and drinks. Yeah. It was also to keep the cafe clean, and also, critically, to periodically make rounds and kick people out once their time had expired. Because oftentimes, a lot of these gamers
kick him
would get
out
sucked into their games, lose track of time, and basically end up playing for longer than they'd actually paid for. So the cashier grabbed her clipboard with all the information about
each of the customers, how long they had paid for,
and then she began making her rounds in the back. And part of it was she needed to speak basically to all the people that were there and confirm that they were supposed to pay.
Never interrupt a guy who is on an intense game for a long period of time. Never do this. This guy's going to knock her out because she's going to distract him, and then the other guy's going to kill him when he was in a good position to kill the guy. He's not going to get the win because she's saying, you're not paid enough time, and he's going to go batshit.
But she needed to speak basically to all the people that were there and kind of confirm that they were supposed to be here still. But as she walked into the back, per usual, nobody looked up at her. I mean, all these people at all their terminals were heads down, fully focused on their game. I mean, completely immersed.
Zombies.
So she began going, one person to the next, being like, hey, are you good? Did you pay for your time? Are you going to be here any bit longer? And a lot of these guys, they'd finally look up and be totally shocked she's even standing next to them because they weren't paying attention at all. But, one by one, she checked each of the monitors, and eventually she got to Chen. When she got to Chen, Chen was focused on this game entirely, to the point where when she said, hey, your time is up. You've been here for 24 hours. You paid for, 8 or 9 or whatever it was. Chen didn't even look up at her. I mean, nothing she could do could get Chen to even acknowledge her. He was so focused on the game. And so eventually the cashier, out of frustration, was like, hey, and she kind of tapped his shoulder, and Chen leaned back. And when he did, and the cashier got a good look at him, she screamed. It would turn out, until this very moment, Chen had gotten his wish. He had come to this cafe 24 hours earlier and been totally left alone. He got to exclusively just play his game in his own world. In fact, the whole time he was here, no one had even looked at him. Because if they had, they would have seen something was horribly wrong. It was the cashier who walked over to him and tapped on his shoulder who noticed what was wrong. Here's what the cashier saw. This is a picture of Chen. And Chen is in full rigor mortis. Because 9 hours earlier, when he was in the middle of that really intense fight with that opponent who was about to beat Chen and his team, Chen, he got really excited and he was about to land that big strike that potentially could have been the blow that would have won the match. Well, he was so amped up that Chen had a heart attack and died.
Oh, shit!
And for the 9 hours after he died, when he was still in the same position he was in playing the game, nobody noticed. He just sat there appearing to be fully alive, locked into the game like everybody else.
What?
But he was actually dead. And so it wasn't until the cashier tapped Chen on the shoulder and he rocked backwards, still in his gaming position, but because he's in rigor mortis, his hands kind of jutted out in front of him up into the air, that she realized he was actually dead. Chen's family would later say that he had pre-existing heart issues that very likely contributed to his fatal heart attack.
League of Legends killed him. No way, and that was obviously the photo there. I mean, I bet you can get the full photo of him like from somewhere. But Jesus Christ. I mean, obviously he goes there a lot, and they expect him to play games for a long time, won't they? Because obviously they'll know him. But I mean, if he's got underlying like health issues in the first place, then obviously, wow. Right, okay, on to the next. The next one is called The Perfect Shot. Let's do this.
On the afternoon of October 11th, 2023, A 48-year-old man named Samuel Gomez stood in the lobby of the Moxie Hotel in Portland, Oregon, talking to the concierge.
Right.
Samuel had flown in from Phoenix earlier that morning because he was speaking at a conference in Portland later that week. But for now, he was just gonna go out and enjoy the sights, and so he had asked the concierge to give him some local recommendations. The concierge named a few cool local places, Samuel thanked him, and then he headed out the front door onto the road. And as soon as Samuel was outside, he immediately heard this loud commotion happening right down the street. And he turned and looked in the direction, and he saw this kind of gaggle of people and cars sort of standing in what looked like a big circle around whatever was happening over there. Samuel couldn't tell what it was, but people were honking and people had their phones out filming sort of whatever was in the middle of the circle. And from the looks of it, it appeared there was at least one police officer in his car sort of beginning to marshal the scene and block traffic. But, you know, there was just this chaotic scene happening, and Samuel really had no idea what it was. But naturally, being a human, he was interested. He wanted to see what was going on. And so Samuel began walking down the road, and as he did, he pulled out his phone, opened up his camera, and began filming and taking pictures.
Right.
And as he got closer to whatever was going on here, the cacophony of horns and people yelling and all the chaos just got louder and louder, and it still wasn't clear at all to Samuel what the heck this even was. And so he just continued to take photos and just kind of be an onlooker. And at some point, when Samuel got right up close and actually was standing right near that police officer blocking traffic, he happened to turn his phone and aim his camera at the police officer.
Can't do that, mate.
When he did, he took a photo. Here is the photo he took. As you can see, the police officer is aiming his gun directly at Samuel. And that's because...
When's that ever been a police car? That's like a family saloon. It's not even a good... Well, I suppose it is a good undercover car, but... I mean, why that car? Anything could outrun that piece of shit. It's probably electric.
The police officer is aiming his gun directly at Samuel.
Right.
And that's because this is not a police officer. Samuel just thought he was a police officer.
That's why.
When he looked down the road at this crazy scene, he saw this guy in a car who sort of appeared to be, maybe an undercover cop, sort of, in the right place at the right time, taking charge and handling whatever this was. When in reality, this man who's in this photo is a guy named Jeffrey Hammond who had just been involved in a road rage incident, and he shot and killed a 47-year-old man named Ryan Martin.
Shit.
That was the scene that Samuel had walked out to.
Shit.
Jeffrey Hammond shooting and killing Ryan Martin. That's what everybody was reacting to. And so as Samuel walked down the road not knowing that, he inadvertently stood right in front of the shooter, who was still sort of crazed, aimed his camera at him right as Jeffrey Hammond swung his gun around and shot Samuel. So like literally seconds after this photo was taken, Samuel got shot. Luckily though, Samuel would survive the shooting. As for Jeffrey Hammond, he was arrested and charged with murder, and as far as we know, he's currently in jail awaiting trial.
Wow. I'm going to say, what's the police doing that piece of shit car? But it's his car, because it is a family car, and because he's supposed to be a normal person. But do you know what? Road rage is a bad thing. I suffer from it, but I don't carry a gun. I'll tell people off, shout at them, give them the finger, but I don't, do stuff like that.
Oh, he is currently in jail awaiting trial.
The masterpiece.
On April 5th, 2018, a young man named Luis Hernandez sat inside of a small stone shack with a metal roof on a rural property in northern Venezuela. Luis was a painter, and for the last year or so, this shack had doubled as both his home and his art studio. And it was basically always a mess. There was dirty dishes and food everywhere, and all his paint supplies were scattered all over the ground.
Right.
But the walls were all adorned with all of his beautiful and most prized possessions, his artwork. He mainly painted really dramatic-looking portraits in very bold colors. In fact, when he was actually doing his painting, when he was in the middle of the floor, right in the center of his shack, on one wall, there was this face of a man he had done, all in red, and then on the left, on the other wall, was this woman's face, all in blue, but with bright red lips. Right. And these paintings were both so intense that at times, as he was doing his work, it sort of felt like they were both looking at him. But on this particular day, as Luis sat in the middle of his shack working on his latest project, He put that weird thought out of his mind that, his paintings were watching him and just focused instead on getting this done. He had one more beautiful portrait he was working on, and he took his paintbrush and he dipped it in the black ink and he put the finishing touches on it. And when this portrait was done, Luis kind of sat back and took it all in, and he couldn't help but feel a bit emotional because this project, it was different than any other he had ever done. He wasn't doing it for fun. He wasn't doing it for pay. He was doing it as a way to cope with a big crisis in his life. So this shack where Luis worked and lived, and also the rural property that it sat on, belonged to Luis's boyfriend, Lisandro Rosales Garcia.
Right.
Lisandro and Luis had met about a year earlier when Luis was really down on his luck and was actually homeless, living out on the streets. But Lisandro had seen Luis and offered to let him come live in this shack on his property, which was out in the middle of nowhere. And Luis, who's got no other options, is like, awesome, yes, I'd love to do that. And so he moves out into the shack, and pretty quickly after moving in, Luis and Lisandro, they formed a more romantic relationship, and Luis was so happy. He felt like Lisandro was the one person who really understood him and truly supported his art. But then, about 2 months ago, Lisandro had just gone missing. The police were looking into it, but so far, Luis had not gotten any updates. And so Luis was handling this huge gap in his life now, the only way he knew how to, which was with his art. And so this latest project he had just finished was sort of like a tribute to his missing boyfriend.
Okay.
But as Luis put his brush down and stood up to admire his work, he suddenly heard voices from outside. Now, this was highly unusual because this property really was very remote. I mean, the only time Luis or Lisandro would see people here was if they invited them. And Luis had not invited anyone.
Right.
But before Luis could even react to, these strangers on his property, those people outside began pounding on Luis's front door. And so Luis, he opened up the door, and standing there were all these police officers. And Luis's first reaction was, oh, they must be here to give me some updates about Lisandro's disappearance. But these police officers, they didn't give an update. Instead, they just pushed past Luis into the art studio and began scooping up all his paints and paintbrushes. And then at some point, one of the officers actually looked down and saw the final project that Luis had been working on, his tribute to his missing boyfriend. And when the officer saw that painting, he turned around, ran outside, and vomited. Here is a picture of that tribute. Now, at first glance, this piece of art is totally unremarkable. It appears to be some sort of stained glass with green leaves and some blue and red flowers. But when you consider the types of supplies that Luis used to make this particular piece of art, you'll realize how horrifying this image actually is. And it's what caused that officer to vomit. It would turn out Luis was not just a painter. He was also a serial killer. And what he would do is after he killed his victims, he would use their blood, their ashes, and their other body parts to paint all of his paintings.
Oh, shit.
Now, at first, Luis and Lisandro were actually a happy couple. However, at some point in February of 2018, they got into some kind of fight, and Luis killed Lisandro and quickly began using his body parts to create this tribute to his boyfriend.
Jesus
if you look
Christ.
again at the tribute painting, all the red that is used is Lisandro's blood, and all the black that's used is Lisandro's ashes. All told, police would find the remains of at least 6 people on that
Jesus
property.
Christ.
They also found evidence that Luis was not just using their body parts to make art, he was also cannibalizing his victims.
Oh.
Luis was arrested.
He looks like that guy out of the film Ghost. Is his name Willie? Do you remember the film Ghost with Patrick Swayze? And they had that, his mate from work, Carl, tried to get him killed. Well, got him killed by the guy named Willie. He looks like him. He does. What the fuck? Who does this?
Their body parts to make art, he was also cannibalizing his victims.
Oh my God.
Luis was arrested and made a full confession. As far as we know, he is currently incarcerated in Venezuela.
For the rest of his bloody life. A serial killer. A serial killer who likes to paint with your bones and your blood and your ashes and everything else. What the hell? What goes through someone's mind? They can't be thinking normally. They can't have any frontal cortex in that brain at all whatsoever. I'm still thinking about the first story where the guy died at the game. He was there for like 12 hours after he'd paid. no one knows he died. I mean, well, at least he didn't waste anything. I mean, some quite shocking ones there. The second one was a bit mild, but the other two, crazy. I mean, because the second one, he didn't die, did he? I mean, it's not mild to turn a phone onto someone and they shoot you. A road rage incident, but I mean, the other two were like weird, crazy, weren't they? Wow. You see why they give you 3 weeks of nightmares, Mr. Ballen. Anyway, what did you guys think of this? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to check out the original video, and I'll see you all next time.